I'm Jackie Doucette, and I'm on a mission to discover exactly what life is like beyond retirement. Join me while I chat with people who've already done it, who've retired to something rather than from something. Let's find out together exactly what's waiting for us when we say goodbye to that 9 to 5. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Retirement. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Joseph Curry, the owner and CEO of Matthews & Associates, located in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, where Joe and his team help Canadians achieve what he calls true wealth. Joe's a certified financial planner and a certified health specialist. He's also the host of Canada's fastest growing retirement podcast, Your Retirement Planning Simplified. Joe, thanks for joining me today.
I'm excited to be here, Jackie. Thank you.
So my first question is always the same. Can you tell us just a little bit more about your background, who you are, and how you ended up doing what you're doing now?
Sure, absolutely. So I'd say first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father of 2 young boys. But aside from that, as you mentioned, I have a financial planning firm. Specifically, we were focused on retirees or people approaching retirement. And the way I got here is my dad, he's in this industry as well. And I remember this would be around the dot-com crash. So somewhere around 2000, I can, vividly remember him coming home from work, and I could just see he kind of had like a proud thought. And so anyway, he expanded on that. And basically he told me he got a call from one of his clients that day. She's an elderly lady, and she called him just to say, Lauren, my dad, thanks so much. You're the reason I can sleep at night through all this market turmoil. And so anyway, so he shared that with me back then when I would have been about 15 or 16. And that really kind of got me thinking of this path of going into financial planning. And so I've gone through some different kind of iterations, kind of finding my niche and where I really, enjoy working. And so for the last, probably since 2017, I've really kind of honed in and started focusing on this retiree and pre-retiree age group or demographic. And it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy helping people kind of make that transition and then helping them make the most of retirement when they get there.
Wow, I like that. I can't really imagine a 15, 16-year-old boy thinking, hey, I want to go into financial planning like my dad. Most of them, they have their own thoughts. Maybe they want to do their dad's work, but quite often it's not that kind of work. I think that's great.
Yeah, well, I think it really was a lot to do with kind of that moment or that experience kind of turned that light bulb on. I think around that time, I had some ideas of what I wanted to do. I liked the idea and the freedom of being a business owner. So I was, maybe kind of thinking about that already. And I liked math, finance, just that would always interest me from a young age. So, but just kind of seeing that impact he was having on clients was what really made me kind of make that jump down this path.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. So in the intro, I said that you have certifications as a financial planner and a health specialist. And I think that probably both of those are directly related to what you do with your clients.
Sure.
I talked about the true wealth that you help your clients find. And I think that's what I want to share with the listeners. Can you talk a little bit about what true wealth means and how you focus on helping your clients find it?
Sure. Yeah. So we kind of define that in a couple of ways. So first and foremost, it is helping our clients find or achieve financial freedom, but also create opportunities for those or the foundations, whatever it is that they love, whatever they're passionate about, and also spending their time and money on the things and the people that they enjoy. So it's helping with that framework of the financial piece, but it's really, money is just a means to something else. And so that's what we really want to help people understand is like, what does that means? And how are you working towards that and making the most of your life? Because it's not just about getting financially free. That's just kind of opens the door to be able to have everything else that's important in life.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? I mean, everybody says, money can't buy you happiness, but it's important to have the money so you can do the other things.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm maybe the wording I use on that might not be the best wording to have what's important in life, because there's a lot of things that have nothing to do with money at all, but it just opens up those additional opportunities, I guess is the point I'm trying to make.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's important to have your finances in order so that you're comfortable and able to do all the other things that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to talk a little bit about it, but one of the values, when we go through kind of values exercise with our clients or new potential clients, that almost always comes up, especially if it's a couple, for at least one of them, is security. That's kind of the value that we hear over and over and over again. And that's what the finances can help with.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, you mentioned that. I know you've developed something that you call a retirement navigator that you use to help your clients plan their retirement. And it's got a few different parts. So can you talk a little bit about what the different parts are?
Sure. Yeah. So the first two parts are completely unrelated to money. So kind of section number one is all about understanding your core values. And section number two is all about finding your purpose. So the rest of it, I won't dive really too much into the rest of it, but it's all the kind of the pieces you need to put together for the financial planning aspects of your retirement. And so, but the main reason that I developed this is because when we would go through meetings with potential clients, we'd have the conversation around values and around purpose. But what I found is that it's kind of hard for people to just let that roll out of them. Some people are good at it, but others, they haven't really thought about that. They haven't had maybe in those conversations with themselves or their spouses in a lot of scenarios. So the navigator, what it really does is it gives a bit of a framework for people to kind of take that ahead of a meeting with us. It's also on our retirement planning simplified.ca website. We're going to be putting it up there just so anyone, whether they're a client or not, they just have a framework for starting with what I would say is the most important piece of your retirement planning. When it comes to the values, again, a lot of people really haven't thought about this. They inherently have some kind of maybe a feeling deep inside of what those values are and maybe act in accordance with those. But I think a lot of people haven't really sat down to think about what they are. And more importantly, they haven't really directed their spending in a way that's necessarily working with their values. So what I mean by that is a lot of people kind of just spend kind of almost like impulse spending, right? Not everyone, but that happens a lot. And when we can work through values with somebody and they're clear on what those top values are, and then they go back through their spending, they can see what they're spending that actually is in alignment with their values, and where they're also just kind of spending a lot of money without really thinking about it was really not bringing them any additional meaning to their life. So that's why we really want to start there. Because we can help people line up their spending with their values, but also it allows them to start thinking about retirement beyond working, like how are they going to be spending their time, what types of activities they want to do, who do they want to be doing it with, all that kind of stuff. So the exercise that we created is first off, it's just asking people to go ahead and list the first 10 words that come to mind when they think of their own values. For some people, that's easy. They get the 10 words there pretty quickly. For other people, that could be, an hour exercise, just thinking of 10 words that might represent something close to their values. But then after they've kind of done the first things that come to mind, then what we have them do is we give them a list. And so if you're listening to this and you don't actually have the navigator, you could just Google a list of values, right? And so we have a whole list of what some people will consider a core value so that you can kind of go through. It'll get you thinking of some other things. You can just go through and circle or highlight all those words that mean something to you, have a little bit of a deeper meaning. And then what we have you do is then we take your words, the words you've highlighted, and then go back through them and narrow them down to less than 7, right? And so that's, again, a process in itself, which could take some time. And so one of the things when people are having trouble working through that is what we would say is, if you have a couple values, like, do any of those values cancel each other out, right? I can't even think of an example right now, but there are sometimes you'll see where this value, like, it's important to me, but when I spend too much on this value, this really important value, actually, there's no room for it, right? So it just can kind of help you narrow down when you think about it or approach it that way. But once you get through that, if you should have, 5 to 7. When I've done my own core values, I have the 7. I can go down any further than that. But anyway, that now gives you some framework for thinking about your decisions, again, for what are you going to do in retirement? How are you going to spend your time? And also when it comes to spending, right? So a lot of people are in a situation where when they have that financial freedom, like, they don't have to think so much about their spending. But a lot of people, they're in a good situation, but they can't just spend on anything and everything. They need to give some consideration to it and watch it a little bit. So that really can give them a filter, because when your values are clear, your decisions are a lot easier. Any questions or thoughts on the value piece before I go into purpose?
Yeah, well, definitely. And for people who haven't really spent any time thinking about this, values can be just about anything. I guess it's like loyalty or freedom or fun or, all of those things are values. And it's just all the kind of emotion driving forces that you think of in your life. Those are what stir your values, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, giving people, especially when people haven't thought about this, hearing examples is helpful, right? So like some of my values are family and adventure. Those are kind of two of my big ones, like lifetime growth. Those are some of my values. So, but yeah, when you really think about that, get intentional about how you're living, you might make a lot of changes in your life, because we all, when we're young, we have all these dreams of how we want to do things and what things will look like when we're older. But then we just start working and we have kids and we don't really think about any of that stuff anymore, right? So retirement's a time to go back to those core values and think about who you are and who you want to be, and actually start living out those values.
Yeah, I think that's it's something that a lot of people want to do and don't spend a lot of time doing. And I think I went through the values part, and it took me a while to come up with them. And I've done it a few times, and happily, it's the same words that always come back to me, which is good, I guess. But
Absolutely.
there's only 3 or 4 that always come out at the top of the list. And things like, for me, it's number 1 is freedom. And for me, every time I've done any list, freedom has been the one that's always made it, all the way through all the scratching outs. And, it's got to be there, because to me, that's the epitome of life beyond retirement, is you're free to do what you want, when you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you on that one.
And it's funny because adjusting your spending to go along with that is something that I have trouble with. I am for sure the impulse spender all the way. It's like, wow, I really hope that I drop off the face of the earth before my money runs out, because it's going to be close.
Yeah, that's it is the tough thing, but again, at least it's giving you a bit of a filter. But freedom that's a tough one for the spending.
It is because you've got to put ties on that. You've got to put a little bit of a box around what it really means, or it's going to be way too free.
Yeah, fair enough. That's where I guess if you can look at some of your other values and also kind of use them as your filter.
Yep. So after they figure out their values, you move on to your purpose.
Yeah. So purpose. So one of the things I say about purpose is, a lot of people, when they start thinking about, what's my purpose, they get kind of fixated on this idea that they should know, or they should be choosing some purpose that's a lifelong pursuit that they can never change and they have to devote their whole life to. And so when I talk about purpose, that's not what I'm talking about. And I mean, if you can find that, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But that kind of that's that whole paralysis by analysis thing is what sets in for a lot of people, right? And they never really get too clear on it. But the whole idea, the reason we're talking about this, especially as we approach retirement, is because most people from that kind of go into the workforce, whether you're a business owner or you're an employer, whatever your career looks like, and you have kids, and you form an identity, right? So, whether that identity is as a business owner, that identity is as a parent, or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you end up in retirement and you don't know how to identify anymore, because maybe your kids have moved out and you've retired, so you don't have your work. So all of a sudden you have this completely different world that you're not used to. You don't know where you fit in. So the idea of coming up with purpose is really just like, what's going to get you out of bed in the morning once you don't have to be up for work specifically, right? And so you don't have to just have one purpose, and you don't have to have, say, multiple purposes that just never ever change. They can be ever changing, right? So what we try to do in the Navigator is, how people go through, like, what are the things you're doing while you're still working that you love? What skills do you have that you really like using? Thinking about, like, when you were a kid, what are some of the things that you wanted to do that you've never really got around to do, or maybe you did, just don't get to do them as much as you like? What are things, just over time that you've thought look interesting, but because of work and kids and everything else, you've just never had a chance to pursue? So just start kind of putting together a list of all of this. And then it's, kind of looking at your values. Like, do your values also kind of give you some other ideas of things you might want to do? And so, this might lead you back to continuing to work, but maybe in a different capacity than your working years. Maybe it's spending time, volunteering with charities that you're passionate about, or maybe it's just being a grandparent and being available to help your kids with your grandkids. So anyway, there's a lot of different ideas that can kind of come up here, but the point is that you don't just have to choose one thing, but it is getting clear on kind of what are your priorities, right? And Jackie, we're going to have you on my podcast, and we'll talk a little bit about the kind of the different phases. So there's always the honeymoon phase, right, where you probably are trying a little bit of everything. Everything's exciting. It's kind of the vacation. I think they put in pictures, but It's not really the vacation or the retirement that lasts, right? So once you get through that honeymoon, you're going to want to be a little more clear on like where those priorities are, again, purposes. So I'm going to switch the language now from purpose to priorities, right? So if we think about it in terms of priorities, it's easier for people to get their head around. So for me right now, my priorities are my family, my health, and my business. Those are my three key priorities, right? So when I'm thinking about how I'm spending my time, it's always being intentional about making sure those three areas are looked after before I go anywhere else in my life. And again, it comes back to intentionality. I think I've used that word a couple of times now. But those purposes, they may change over time, right? At some point, maybe I want to retire. So maybe being a business owner is no longer going to be one of my purposes or priorities. And so I mentioned one of my values is adventure. So maybe I switch that to doing more travel or more adventures and figuring out, maybe I end up getting into more hiking or mountaineering, or who knows what it is, right? But so those can change over time. That's just an example. But my family values or priority is probably never going to change. Like that's probably going to stay pretty front and center for me. And my health, like those are two important things to me that I don't know what the future holds, but I don't see a world where those are changing. But my business owner to retiree, there's going to be some kind of a change there at some point. And that's really for me, the one that I'll have to get clear on, ideally before retirement, about what's going to take that place, right? And I use the example in the Navigator. For some people, it might just be one of those priorities might be to find the next priority. And so maybe that is just spending time each week, being curious and exploring some of these things we talked about earlier, right? Like things you wanted to do when you were a kid or whatever else comes to mind when you built that list. Maybe you can't just narrow it down, but you can spend some time experimenting with activities related to those different passions or ideas or skills, and just seeing where it takes you. And maybe you do something for a while, maybe it turns into golf, but you realize you actually hate golf. So that's fine. Get rid of it, try something else. That's probably not a good example because again, that's one of those things we think we're going to retire to, but we can get sick of playing it after a while, and it's not really a purposeful retirement.
That's funny. Golf is definitely not one of the things I was planning to retire to. It's got to be the least ideal sport for me. I can't even imagine going out and spending time doing something that from the very first swing is going to frustrate me.
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So I think I mentioned to you earlier, I'm going golfing this afternoon, but every Thursday afternoon, it's the same thing. Yeah. Like, why am I doing this?
Yeah. Anyway. I tell my friends, I've got this cartoon. I don't know if you're familiar with the old BC comic strip with the all the Stone Age guys. And one of them was explaining to one of the women about golf, and she's looking at him like he's crazy, going, the idea is to hit it as few times as possible. And he goes, yeah, that's it. So she hands him the club and says, why hit it at all?
Perfectly sums it up right there.
So I really like the way that you kind of shifted from purpose to priorities and passions and kind of interchanged them all, because I think a lot of people really have trouble with the idea of what is their purpose in life. And they think that they have to have some big, deep, Mother Teresa kind of calling. And, it's so not that. And having your priorities in place or having your likes and dislikes lined up, I think is what it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a term that he's a business coach, Dan Sullivan, uses, unique ability. And so he's relating that to business owners, like continue to do more and more of your unique ability and give up the other things that you're not as good at or you don't enjoy doing. But it's kind of the same idea, when you move into retirement, is you have that ability to do what you want. So think about what are those things, that you like to do and maybe you're good at, and how do you just do more of that and less of the things you don't want to do. right?
Yeah.
But it's never, for some people maybe it is, but for most people it's never perfectly static and unchanging.
No.
It's okay to evolve and continue to change over time.
Yeah, for sure. When you first retire, like you mentioned, maybe your sole purpose is to look after your grandkids so that your kids can continue to work and do what they need to do. But those kids are going to grow up, and that can't be your purpose forever.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
Yeah, I had a guest one other time, and he called that unique work your Picasso work. The work that you are the artist on, you do that, and you let other people do the rest of the stuff, and everybody's happy that way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the kind of thing that gives you energy, right? And you want to keep coming back to.
Yeah, exactly. So once people have, they've gone through the values and the purpose, how do they feel usually in your experience? How are people looking at retirement?
A lot of people haven't, well, especially when we were just having this conversation in a meeting, like they weren't really expecting to go there with a financial planner. They're thinking about looking at their investment statements and things like that, right? So I think I get a lot of surprise. I get people thinking a lot harder than maybe they expected. But it also then gets people opening up and they start talking a lot more, because at the end of the day, when we think about it, like that's why we want to retire. We want to retire so that we can focus more on those types of things, right? But I think in a lot of cases, people just haven't been given permission to start thinking that way. And especially when they're not 100% sure if they're ready financially to retire, right? That's what they're coming into. So, but again, always want to make sure, even if someone's a ways out from retirement, we still want to get clear on the values and purpose, just to make sure we're spending our time and our money in a way that is actually meaningful to us. So anyway, that just kind of sets the framework. So then when we put together any kind of planning, we kind of keep that front and center on the top of any plan, just to make sure that any advice that we're giving is relating back to those values and the purpose. And then we get into goals more specific, right, as we go, but it's kind of bringing it all back to that. So yeah, so it is something I don't think most people initially are expecting. But the more I talk about it on podcasts and things like that, I think people are becoming a little more accustomed to it.
Yeah. And I've listened to a few episodes on your podcast, a few of the different people who are not bent financially, but are doing more of the, what are you going to do with retirement sort of things. And I think it's a good balance that you've got, because it's important. All of those parts are important.
Yeah. And I find that making that transition is hardest for people who, like devoted themselves to their career.
Yeah.
And those are a lot of the people that we work with, right? A lot of business owners come in and like, that's just, 40 to 60 hours a week. They've just been doing that for 40 years. And all of a sudden they think they're going to sell their business and turn it all off. And they haven't really given a lot of thought to it, right? So it's really important in those scenarios to make sure that we're having those conversations, but both with me, if I'm the planner, or whoever the planner is, but also with themselves and with their spouse, if that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a shock when you wake up that first morning and you don't have a job to go to anymore, if you've been doing it for 60, 70 hours a week for 40 years.
Yeah, I can only imagine that. I mean, obviously I haven't done that yet, but I hear all the stories from all our clients. Yeah.
So you said you work with people who are, preparing for retirement. When do you recommend that people start thinking about the Retirement Navigator and starting to do those activities?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I think my next podcast I do solo is actually going to be on that. But I always tell people, I mean, the best time to start planning for retirement is probably 40 years ago if you're thinking about retiring in the next couple of years. But I think the question really is like, okay, when do we start shifting our thinking from just saving money for retirement to actually getting clear on what's that next step look like? So, I usually tell people if we can start at least like 3 or 4 years ahead of the ideal retirement date, that's good, because then you have time to start thinking about it, what it's going to look like, going through like the navigator, like we just talked about. So getting clear, and, part of that might answer the question of, do you really want to retire? I also think a lot of people retire because they think they're supposed to when they hit a certain age, which if you love what you're doing, that doesn't mean you don't have to retire, right? You can, and that's great, but you also don't have to. So part of it, just get clear, make sure that's the right decision for you. When you're identifying those priorities, it's helping maybe you get a better picture of what retirement might look like. So then from there, you can start to get an idea about, okay, well, how much money you actually need to support retirement, like on an annual basis or a monthly basis. And then we can start working in the finance pieces, like where are we at, where we need to get from today over the next few years to be in a position where we have that financial freedom. And if we're not where we need to be, what are the levers that we could be pulling? Like, do we want to work longer? Do we want to maybe scale back our lifestyle and not spend as much? Do we want to work part-time? So there's a different ways we can go about that. But so getting kind of clear, taking all that inventory. And then once there's some somewhat concrete decisions made, I say that because things can change over a few years. But once we get to say 1 year out, then what I tell people is what we really want to do is we want to take any income you have coming in. We want to have it all go into a separate bank account and then just pay yourself once a month out of that bank account into a checking account that all your spending is done out of. And that amount is going to be what you're planning on spending in retirement. So you're going to find out if you can actually live off of that amount. In a lot of cases, people think they can live off a certain amount, but what they haven't thought about is all the other one-offs that come up, right? Like, oh yeah, that vacation my friends are going on, I never thought about that expense. Or yeah, I still want to get the really nice car. Like I don't want to dial it back on the vehicle. So I'm still going to spend $80,000 on whatever vehicle. So that wasn't really built into the monthly spending. And so anyway, so it just gives people, and if we could do that 2 years out, that's even better. But at least a year out to just see, is that working? Is it reasonable or not? So those are kind of some leading up to retirement steps that could be taken. And ideally, they're taken at least a few years out.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really good advice. I like the idea. 3 or 4 years out is a nice place to start. I'm kind of with you. When people ask me when they should start thinking about it, I tell them when they start working. Plan for that day as early as you can, but at least 3 or 4 years is good. So you can, kind of gauge what's going right and what's not going right.
Yeah, exactly. Just at least know where you're at.
Yeah. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we finish off, is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners about what you've got coming up or that sort of thing? I'm going to put your website and all the information in the show notes so that people can find you, but I don't know if there's anything happening.
Yeah, I'm sure that you hit all the information there. I guess the big focus we have outside of our, financial planning firm is just Your Retirement Planning Simplified podcast, which I'm excited to have you on as a guest. Actually, by the time this airs, you'll probably already have been a guest. So that's kind of our main thing right now. If anybody wants to know what's going on, we just, we don't roll out too far ahead on that, maybe recording a couple of weeks or a month ahead. So that's usually kind of lets everyone know what's going on. And it's just a constant way of getting information in the hands of people who are, again, thinking about or just into retirement so that they can make good choices with their money and start thinking about some of these other topics that we just talked about today.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Joe. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure the listeners have got a lot out of it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on, Jackie. Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of Beyond Retirement. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed it. Are you ready to start rocking your retirement? Head on over to www.beyondretirement.ca/rocking it and sign up to plan out your own roadmap for retirement. Don't wait till it's too late.